for joining us tonight. This is the Silence Shame Community Conversation. Welcome to this webinar. Tonight, you'll be viewing the conversation entitled Preserving the Mental Health and Wellness of Educators. Before we jump in to do introductions, here are some housekeeping rules. You all are muted, but we would love to engage in this conversation with you. If you are viewing from Zoom or from Facebook Live, please submit questions to the Q&A function or the comment section. We have a team back here to make sure that your questions are answered either by the panel of experts or us. We're going to go ahead and jump into introductions in just a moment. I would love for you all to meet our panelists, but first I'd like to start to say, my name is Catie Williams. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Silence the Shame. I have the pleasure of moderating this conversation tonight, and I look forward to hearing from all of our panelists. Dr. King, we'll go ahead and get started with you. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, good evening. My name is LaGarrett King. I'm a professor at the University at Buffalo, also director of the Center for K-12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education. I've been in education for 22 years now, so 8 as a K-12 classroom teacher and the rest as a academic. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Mr. Harris.
Hello, my name is Daerzio Harris. I am a 5th grade teacher in rural Georgia, central Georgia. I have been in education for over 14 years. This is actually my 15th year. I've taught middle school, I've taught an alternative high school, I've taught at community college, and now I'm back in elementary school. And I'm glad to be here as well.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Ms. Hurley.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Hurley. I'm a nursery 3 and 4 assistant at the University of Chicago's laboratory schools. This is my 4th year teaching, and I'm really excited for tonight. I'm also a student at the University of Missouri. I'm finishing my master's degree in counseling psychology, so it's exciting to have a conversation coming from a double lens.
Definitely. And last but not least, Dr. Adrian. You're on mute, Dr. Adrian.
Oh, look, me and technology. I think you saved me for last because I have the most experience out of everybody. Hi, I am Dr. Adrian. I am a licensed psychotherapist in the Atlanta area. This is my 29th year, but I also have 25 consecutive years in education at the elementary, middle, and high school level as a guidance counselor and an assistant principal. And so I think I've done a little bit of everything and been in every lane. And so I'm appreciative of being invited to the conversation.
Yes, I am excited to have you. And so as you can see, we have a wide variety of experiences and footprints in different aspects of education to have this conversation tonight. So I first want to start off by sharing a little bit of information which prompted this discussion. In a 2022 education report released by the Georgia Department of Education Teacher Burnout Task Force, several key factors were identified as stressors that contribute to burnout in educators. One major theme shared by teachers was their mental health and wellness. It is estimated that more than 75% of teachers experience job-related stress compared to 40% of working adults. Additionally, nearly 30% of teachers report symptoms of depression compared to 10% of other adults. With nearly 4 million adults in the education profession, it's important to tackle these unfortunate statistics and continue conversations centered around the mental health and wellness of educators. So I'm excited to engage in this discussion tonight with all of you wonderful educators in whatever capacity that you all serve, and our mental health professionals as well. So we're going to jump right on in. Mr. Harris, as a member of the task force, what motivated you to join, and what was that experience like for you?
Well, it really wasn't a motivation. I actually was asked on there as a representative from one of the largest teacher organizations in the state. And I guess I would serve twofold. I served as a representative because the task force was comprised of the finalists for the 2022 Teacher of the Year. for the state of Georgia. And there were also representatives from each of the other teacher organizations. And I was just fortunate to serve as a member for representing the Professional Association of Georgia Educators. But it was actually, to answer your question about what it was like, it was very eye-opening because there were varied people with varied experiences and from various parts of the state. When you think about all Georgia educators, you think we all experience the same thing. Not true. And so during those conversations, those differences actually showed up, but also you saw a lot of similarities. So it was definitely an honor and a privilege to be a part of that task force. And hopefully, as a result of that, there are some things in place that will carry on to help with teacher burnout.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for being a part of that. I know that I had the privilege of reading it and just looking at some of the things that were contributed. And I think you bring up a good point about how even though, you're in the same state, people's experiences can be different. And similarly, even though we're teachers and all educators on this call, different states and different settings, whether private or public or whatever the case may be, also come with different experiences as well. So I kind of want to piggyback off of that because I know, Rebecca, you mentioned that you have a different type of education background with being in the early childhood setting. So from your perspective, what pressures associated with teaching weigh the most on your mental health?
I think that in this day and age as well, there's a lot of stuff happening around us just in our regular and personal lives. So I think finding a lot of balance between being an educator where on a day-to-day you're expected to provide, especially for my students, I've got some of the youngest members of our learning community. And so my charge feels very personal, and it feels like I want to provide an opportunity for you to feel comfortable and safe. And I want you to come to school excited and feel like your teachers are here to support you and push you. And a lot of those expectations can feel heavy in the midst of so much stuff happening around us. And you yourself are trying to stay afloat, and you're trying to figure out, how can I feed into myself on top of making sure that I'm still doing my job and feeding into my students. And so I think my career as a teacher kind of started on the cusp of the pandemic. My first year of teaching ended in 2020, where we ended the school year relatively early, and school looked a lot different after that. So I think right now, mental health is so forward on our minds, and the expectations of what being a teacher looks like right now feels a lot different than it did pre-pandemic, pre-2020, pre all the things that have happened to us in the last 2 years. And so I feel strongly that now the things that weigh the heaviest on my mind are ensuring that I'm completing my task, I'm doing my responsibilities, but I'm also making sure that I take care of myself. I feel like burnout has been so heavy lately, especially in young teachers, because I think a lot of us, similar to me, started our careers without knowing that COVID was even going to be a thing, or any of the things that have happened in the last 2 years would be so abrupt and change so much about what we were taught in our education programs, about what we thought being a teacher was going to look like. So I think now the expectations of my responsibilities and my day-to-day weighs really heavily on, okay, am I going to complete that, or am I going to take care of myself right now? And I feel like in my experiences, even in undergrad, trying to figure out who I was as an educator and who I wanted to be as a teacher have really shifted, because teaching becomes so much a part of your identity that when you're trying to figure out mentally, where am I at? I need to think about separating myself from my job and figuring out, okay, how can I do all of these things? And if I can't do them, how can I ensure that I'm putting my health and my safety and my well-being first? And so I think the expectations and what being a teacher is generally now feels so different. And that's what kind of weighs heaviest on who I am as an educator and how I'm going to do my job.
Yeah, and that's so interesting that you say that, because that was kind of wraps up some of the other pressures and themes that were contributed in the burnout report. So just to kind of recap, in addition to mental health and wellness, the task force also identified assessments, time, pressures, unrealistic expectations, lack of teacher voice, and professional growth as other key themes. So you kind of wrapped it all up right there with your response. Dr. King, I'd like to hear from you. As a veteran in education and someone who has also worked as a professor on the college level for those aspiring to be teachers, what support or tips can you offer to educational professionals to manage their well-being as they start the school year and throughout the school year?
So I forgot to mention I taught in Georgia, and a lot of people from Georgia and everything else from there. So shout out to Cedar Grove High School and Booker T. Washington High School, the two places that I taught at. But one of the first things that was told to me, but it was framed differently than mental health, right? Was take your days, right? And it was framed at that particular moment because we didn't talk about like mental health the way in which we talk about it now. The profession has changed so much, but it was framed around this notion of, well, you're not going to get them, right? You have them, you need to take them. But in reality, we were all saying for your mental health, right? Take those particular days. If it's 6, if it's 12, whatever it is, do not, stack them up, right? But take your days. Also, I think what's really important as you begin to search for jobs is really look at your insurance policies and see if mental health services are offered under those particular policies, whether it's through the school district or whether it's through private entities. See if that is kind of offered. I'm not 100% sure. Is offered in higher ed is offered through your insurance. I think it's important, particularly for younger teachers who are very excited to get into the profession, to understand that teaching is just a job. I think Becky kind of mentioned it earlier. It's like teaching is just a job. I understand that we have, teaching is a calling. I love it. I love kids. I love this, but in reality, it's just a job, right? And so, therefore, teaching is something that you do, is not who you are. So, meaning that, keep those hobbies, right? Go out with your friends, right? Find a life outside of the teaching. If you're in a rural space, if you're in a small city and, everyone kind of connects, try to find somewhere outside where you can just be yourself. I think there's a question that we're going to talk about groups and finding your educational groups. So I'll save that. But to piggyback on Becky, this notion of rest, taking care of yourself, eating well and exercising, I think will serve purposely, because at the end of the day, right, you can't be the best teacher if you're not well.
That is so true. I wish I could have heard those things earlier on in my career. For people who are listening who might not know, I actually have previous experience as an elementary educator. I taught for 3 years in the elementary setting. And some of those things that you mentioned, I remember like being a first year teacher and spending my weekends and spending my nights like boggled down in work because I felt like that was who I was supposed to be. And so, yeah, definitely that's great advice. And I appreciate you for sharing that. Dr. Adrienne, can you identify some of the challenges that are associated with why educators struggle with prioritizing their mental health? Kind of like what we pretty much just talked about.
Well, again, I have a lot of experience. I think Dr. King and I running almost neck and neck, but I think I'm a little bit ahead of you. But I remember when I started in education in 1994, I came in as a mental health professional. And so my perspective was always different from that of a traditional educator who was so focused on pedagogy. And I was saying 30 years ago, we have to look at the whole child. We've got to be willing to look at traumas. We have to look at all these things. And back then, people were not having conversations about mental health at all. And so when I became an assistant principal, if I saw a teacher that was frustrated, it was nothing for me to call them into my office and say, is today the day that you need to take a mental health day? And so my teachers became very accustomed to that language before it was popular, because what I knew is that if they were frustrated for whatever reason, there might be something going on in their personal life, but if I heard them taking that frustration out on a child, I knew that they needed a break. And so I think that one thing that has typically been a theme with educators is this feeling of guilt, that if I am not in place for my students, that somehow I have done a disservice to them by allowing a substitute to be there to educate them. And so I think there's a lot of concern that somehow children won't get what they need. And for that reason, a lot of times educators won't take the time that they need to take for themselves. And so I have seen it come full circle. You know, I agree with Dr. King. You know, it's a thing now. People know when they are getting to a point where they have to say, I need a break. I can't do this one more minute. And they recognize that by not taking a break, they run the risk of not only doing damage to the children, but doing damage to themselves as well. So I think guilt, though, has always been a huge factor. And then a lot of times you'll get educators who don't feel comfortable because they'll say they don't want to have to deal with an administrator that may not understand them simply saying, I need a break. No, I'm not sick. No, it's not maternity leave. I don't have to take family leave to go and take care of a parent. I need a break. I need to step back. And so I think that what 2020 taught us all is that it's okay to slow down and unplug in order to recharge. And so I think that that has to continue to be the message, especially for teachers who do put a lot of energy, time, and their own finances into educating children.
I see all of us like, yep, that's exactly right. Is there any other challenges that any other panelists want to share? I know as I'm thinking about like things that used to come into play for me, Dr. Adrian kind of touched on it, but finances, like teacher pay. You know, I used to be like, oh, I don't want to miss a day because I don't want my pay to be docked, or like, oh, I don't want to not go because then I'm going to have to like try to dip in the sick pool, you know, all these things that affected my conscience and why I personally didn't take that time off. Are there any other things that you all think contribute to the challenges of why we don't prioritize our mental health in the education profession? Mr. Harris, and then Dr. King will come to you.
I want to say something that was stated earlier. It's just sometimes you are guilty for having a sub in. Because you are the content specialist, so to speak. And if you're not there, the students are not receiving the teaching that they should receive to get them prepared for the test that they have to take. So, you know, the goal is we want to make sure they're proficient. If you're in early childhood, the goal is you want to ensure that they're able to read, because when they get to third grade, they're going to take that assessment, and that assessment determines, it's a lot tied to that assessment without going into a political stance. And it is, for me personally, it takes a whole lot more planning to plan for a sub. So it's more stressful to me to plan for a sub rather than just go show up myself.
Yeah. And something I noticed towards my last years in the classroom was when you're out, there was a shortage of subs. So now, the burden of your classroom and the responsibilities go to your colleagues, right? And while I think most of us, handled it pretty well and we covered for our colleagues, but that puts more stress of losing, planning periods and planning time, or just kind of resting a little bit to cover your colleagues' aspects. So all of that. So really seems like, we're talking about a system thing that keeps us from, protecting our mental health.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I want us to be thinking, we'll be talking about this a little later, but just like what would you change if you could? Like we all as educators have these ideas and things that we wish were different. And like, what advice would we be giving, right? So Mr. Harris, before we jump there, I would like to know, either since being on the Burnout Task Force or just in your time in education, and other panelists, I would love for you to chime in too. What positive changes have you seen made in the education system to support mental health? And what are some of the hopes that you have for the future?
Well, it's ironic that you say that. In the past week, the Georgia Department of Education has just released an employee assistance program. And one of the aspects of that is 6 free sessions with a mental health counselor. So that's actually in direct response to the teacher burnout task force report. So I am excited about that. The other thing is just having conversations. I feel like district leadership is more cognizant of what's going on, although that we still have the mission of educating our students. We are being more compassionate, and that has been resounding throughout since 2020, compassion over compliance, because that is what really led to our burnout. Is we have so many checklists that we have to check off to make sure students are this, and this, because we become the only parent to some of our students. And so that's exhausting. And, and even though we're the parent, our hands become tired because there's some things that we can't do that the natural parent can do for those students.
Definitely. And Dr. Adrian, you have a unique perspective kind of on the clinical lens as well. So what are some changes that you have seen?
Well, I am excited because, again, I was sounding the alarm about the mental health aspect that was missing from education. And so in the Atlanta area, in the school system, because I forgot to mention, I got a call and went back into the school system part-time. And, they knew what to call me for. And so when they called me, I said, I got conditions. And they said part-time. I said, you got my attention. They said all boys middle school. I said, I'm there because I am a boy mom. And so I said, I like girls, but I love boys because I think that they need a lot at that middle school perspective. And so in Atlanta Public Schools, one of the things that I applaud them for is that we now have crisis counselors available from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. for students throughout the district. They also provide therapists on site down at the district level for educators. So that's for the teachers, that's for anybody that is a part of the school system. And so for that, I applaud them for moving in that direction. Of course, the piece about social emotional learning, being a part of, every time we're having conversations about equity and inclusion, all of that covers everything that is mental health for our children. And it's a lot, for our educators to be able to learn as well. And so what I would like to see is a more supportive piece for parents, because teachers have the responsibility of children, just as Mr. Harris said, we have the kids for the majority of the waking hours. But I used to always say to my teachers, parents don't keep the best part of the child at home and send you the worst part. They are sending you the absolute best that they know how to parent, but there are still parents out here who need support, because we are all a product of our upbringing and our experiences. And you either do exactly what you saw, or you have an aha moment that says, I need to do something different. And so for Black and brown children, you still have parents who lack a lot of skills and need a lot of support. So that's the next level that I would like to see in education, us being able to truly provide some support for parents to help them raise their parenting so that it helps the children.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you bring up, Dr. Adrian. And again, looking at that child from a whole child perspective, and also looking at the teacher as a whole teacher too, and not just who they are in that classroom, for sure. Dr. King, can you talk a little bit about the importance of staying connected with other educators to manage your mental health?
Yeah, I think There's several different. When you say that question, I'm thinking of kind of mentorship, right? And not kind of the traditional approach to mentorship, like, first year teacher, 20-year teacher, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's some inverse, relationships that can go, because some of the younger teachers coming into the profession, have great ideas and can help, some of the veteran teachers. But talking about mental health, being part of professional organizations, being part of, national organizations can really help teachers kind of broaden their experiences, and sometimes give them, the relief that they need. So I would suggest that teachers, be part of different professional, organizations, whether it's local, state, or national. I also believe that there's some out-of-state mentorship, or out-of-state teachers that, teachers can kind of gather together. So, for instance, my center, we hold a Teaching Black History conference every summer. And we have teachers who find out about the conference and find out about the center every single year. And they're like, oh man, I found my people, right? So it's about teachers finding their people, because your people may not be in that building, right? Your people may not be in your school district, right? Your people may be other places. And since we deal with Black history education and racial literacy education, with the political times that we're in, having people restrict what we would like to teach to help our students a little bit better, being part of those organizations, being around Black teachers, teachers of color, really, really helps people really kind of just breathe and think again about various different things. So find your people, right? And your people can mean various different things.
Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
And I want to piggyback off that too, Dr. King, and something you said earlier about, which I wish I also, as you mentioned, I wish I could have heard in undergrad a little bit more, that this is just a job, just like working at Walmart, or just like working at a tech company. Like, this is just a job. I wish I had heard that more, because I think that also influences your peers and the partners and the friends that you make when you come into this profession as well, because nothing feels better as a teacher than sitting down with another exhausted teacher and being able to share an empathizing moment with each other, because nobody gets my exhaustion like you get my exhaustion. And that just, it kind of weighs a little bit different on you. It picks stuff up off of your shoulders to be able to be around other people and other educators, even if you're in completely different facets, just to be able to share and to pour into each other in a way that you don't always get that at school. I think a lot of times the days and the months throughout the school year can weigh so heavily on you that having that outlet feels so good. And I think that would also be able to assist you in figuring out that this is not all of who I am either. Like, seeing another educator that has a life outside of school and has other hobbies and enjoys other things and doesn't allow kind of this career field to take over everything that you do. It's very helpful to be surrounded by peers that share a career field, but also are able to kind of push you and encourage you to do other things as well. So I wanted to comment on that.
So two things to bounce back on Becca here. It's when you find those people to talk with, that will kind of help your home life as well, because sometimes you bounce those that frustration with your partner, right? And then that may create some tension in your home, which escalates your mental health. And number two, I'm beginning to question all of my speaking points here, because both Catie and Becca were students of mine, and I guess I didn't do a good job in telling them all these things I'm telling you all. So
we all learn over time, Dr. King. That's okay. That's okay.
For sure. And you guys both bring up a great point. It reminds me of something that our founder, Shanti Das, always says is identify your starting five. And so that goes with just like day-to-day wellness, but even in the educational standpoint or any profession that you're in, finding those core five people that you can go to on your rough days, or, you know, go in their classroom when their kids are at specials and just turn off the lights and, you know, take a deep breath. And also utilizing the services that are available to us in the education departments that our districts have outlined. I know that you all mentioned some earlier, but I would love to dive in a little bit deeper there as well. So kind of talking about those resources, or even just the resources that don't exist. One action item that was listed in the burnout report suggested that teachers and staff are provided with mental health support, and that the already existing programs are strengthened. So how do you feel like the current resources that teachers are provided could be strengthened to preserve their mental health? Mr. Harris?
So that's one of those situations or things that varies from district to district. More wealthier districts would probably have those services readily available for their teachers, their employees, whereas a small rural district may not, because their budget may not be able to sustain that. So one thing that I am kind of glad that it's a starting point is that the Department of Education did provide that EAP for teachers. That is a starting point. One thing that I did notice, even with our health insurance, that during the pandemic, and maybe most people may not be aware of, we are allowed a certain number of mental health visits through our health insurance. You may do that via telehealth, or you can set it up face to face. But those are available as well. But again, I just wish that it is something that is uniform throughout for all teachers throughout the state, or states, whomever watching this, that is provided, because again, it depends on where you are. You may not have those services readily available, and you may do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Miss Rebecca?
I don't know for raising hands. I wanted to comment on something that Dr. Adrian, you said a little bit earlier, the way that you shared about being an administrator and sharing with your teachers and your faculty and staff that being able to acknowledge when you need a mental health day. I think a lot of times that some of that guilt for teachers plays a role in not wanting to take the days off. And if I had been having a really rough day and my administrator was able to see that in me and acknowledge that and take the care to be able to say, hey, it looks like you're having a really rough time. Do you want to like take a step back? Do you want to take the day off? I think having that mutual understanding between administrators and faculty and staff that your mental health is just as important to me as it should be to you. I think that oftentimes kind of disconnects administrators and teachers, because teachers feel so much weight and they feel like I'm doing this all by myself. And so being able to hear an administrator that's leading the school take the time to care about their teachers and the work that they do, and how, you know, that can carry so heavily on you. I think hearing that more frequently would be really helpful.
You know, Rebecca, I always had teachers who would say, when you become a principal, I want to come and work with you. You know, no matter where I was, that's what they would say. And I used to say to them, but I don't want to be a principal. And here's the reason why. Because I really am about children. And policies a lot of times are not about children. And I will be the principal that will break the rules, because if little Johnny says that he needs to come to school at 12 o'clock because he had to stay up all night while his mama worked at the factory and he had to keep his brother, then I'm going to say, I'm going to find some teachers who are willing to stay until 6:30 or 7 o'clock so that we can do alternative education. So see, I was so far, you know, beyond my years, in front of my years, we'll say. And so, you know, hopefully now education is moving a little bit, at least, in a direction where we recognize that, you know, as whoever just said, I think Mr. Harris said, you know, compassion over the policies. You know, sometimes the policies, you know, it's just like going to the bathroom, that's one of the things that I hate about educators that everybody doesn't go to the bathroom on the same schedule. I usually say it a little bit more crass than that, but y'all know what I mean. Everybody don't go at the same time. And so to have an expectation that we're going to line kids up and everybody got to go at the same time, I'm like, at what point do we change the thinking? And so I just think that, even though education is making some strides, we still got some work to do. And I was talking about EAP, Mr. Harris, years ago, because I provide EAP and I provide crisis support all throughout the state of Georgia. Every time there's a critical incident, somebody calls me. And I'm like, why were we last in education when those are the people who are responsible for the next generations to get them the support that they need on a regular basis? So kudos to you and your group for the work that you all did to make that happen.
Yes, definitely. It is a fabulous report for those listening. If you can check it out, just search a quick search for it. It'll also be included in the follow-up so that you can check it out. So we're going to be wrapping up shortly, and attendees, feel free to drop questions in the Q&A, whether you're listening on Facebook Live or on the Zoom. You can put that in the Q&A function or the chat. But for my last question, I'd like to know from all of you, what stress management strategies can you offer to those who might be listening in the education field? And anyone, feel free to jump in.
I'll go first. Disconnect. Quick, fast, in a hurry. As soon as you leave that job, as soon as you leave that parking lot, disconnect. I'm fortunate that I don't live in the same area that I teach. So therefore, I do have a commute and I have time to just decompress, get that out. And realize it's okay to have a personal life. I think I've had this conversation multiple times. When I started, it was not really expected for a teacher to stay late. It has now become the norm that you have to stay late to get work done, because on the first day of pre-planning, you got so much you have to do, you already feel like you're behind. And so whatever your contracted hours are, work them and go home. That stuff will be there. And I hate to sound that way, because if you die today, that work will still be there tomorrow for somebody else to pick up. So don't work yourself to death and for them to give you one plant. They'll talk about you for a few days until they put you in the ground. And then somebody else is there to replace you. We're more loyal to that job than most times the job is loyal to us.
Definitely. Dr. Adrienne or Rebecca, do you have any other strategies that you'd like to offer for managing wellness?
Well, I would definitely, piggyback on what Mr. Harris said. And so, as I am listening to you, I'm feeling like I was channeling my energy to you, because what you're saying is what I was saying 30 years ago. If you drop dead tomorrow, they're going to get all that stuff off your desk, put it in a box, and the next person will be sitting in your seat. And so one of the things that I say, even as a psychotherapist, is that no is not a cuss word. And so people have to recognize that when you are more concerned about hurting somebody else's feelings or how they're going to view you, then you are compromising on taking care of yourself. And so if you know that your intentions are good in terms of the self-care piece, then you have to stop being concerned with what other people are going to think and say about the fact that you told them no, and stop doing stuff that you don't want to do. Because when you are doing that, you bringing bad energy into it anyway. So you might as well say no and not have any guilt associated with it, because if you're doing it begrudgingly, you got the wrong kind of energy associated with it anyway. And, find the balance between when somebody tells you you're good at something. And so if you're familiar with the 4 Agreements, it's a book that I use in my practice all the time. Don Miguel needs to pay me money because I've been using it for so long. But if you're familiar with the 4 agreements, you understand that people tell you how great you are, and it has nothing to do with you. It's because of something that they need from you. And so we have to be careful when we get into this space of trying to be on everybody's committee and complete every task at the schoolhouse, because the more you do, the more you will be asked to do. So make sure that you are doing the things that bring joy to your life and not just a check off somebody else's things to do list. I'm just saying, no is not a cuss word.
I love that. Yes. And shout out to the 4 agreements. That's my phone background. I live by it too, Dr. Adrian. But another thing too, I was thinking, and kind of like what you all said, something that I had to learn early on was setting boundaries. And I think that, as a first year teacher, even just a beginning teacher, it's really hard to do that because you're like scared of your administrator, like you're a little bit intimidated by your veteran teachers in the building. But setting boundaries means not taking parent phone calls at 7 p.m. Setting boundaries means, not turning your work email on, on the weekends, maybe putting that on like a scheduled do not disturb. Setting boundaries used to look like, for me, instead of spending lunch with my coworkers, I would sometimes take that lunch to myself to just decompress from the day. Setting boundaries for me would sometimes be at recess duty, instead of talking to my coworkers and hanging out with my kids, just taking that 15, 20 minutes, sometimes it felt like 3 minutes on a short day, just to breathe. I think that's so important to just remember to set boundaries. So yes, definitely.
And Catie too, I want to add, to piggyback off of everybody and including the boundaries, I have allotted only a certain amount of time after the workday every day to talk about work, and then I'm done. No more, no less. And unfortunately, both my fiance and I are teachers. So that conversation can go on for the entire evening, but we set a very hard clock. After this time, we're done. There's no more, because oftentimes it can become a complaining session. And you mentioned, Dr. Adrian, like the energy that you bring into the classroom and what you're bringing home with you. We both noticed that we were bringing home really negative energy, especially on days where we just mentally we were not prepared for what the day was going to bring us. And so coming home with all of that and unpacking all of that for the rest of the night, like you don't even sleep well anymore, because you have just like, it's all in your bones, all in your mind, all in your skin. So we set a timer. After this time, we're done. And for the rest of the night, it just balancing that work and life and figuring out how can I mentally decompress, but also if I can't get it out, I can't get it out. I need to just let it go. So finding that balance.
Yep. Mr. Harris?
Be you, and don't allow anybody to make you feel guilty. We like to use it, and I mean, it's unintentional, but I'm a future administrator myself. That's my goal. Be yourself. Don't allow anybody to guilt you into doing something or make you feel guilty for turning this off. Some people, this is what makes them tick. They feel like all day, every day, 24 hours, 7 days a week, they got to be a teacher. However, if that's not you, don't take on somebody else's persona. Can't nobody be Daerzio but Daerzio. And I'm darn good at it. So, but be you. And don't lose yourself, because as Dr. King said earlier, because it is a job. And it's only one facet of you.
And I think that can be said for any profession too. So regardless of if you're listening and you're an educator, future educator, just having that agency and freedom to remain true to who you are within your career is super important. So we're going to wrap it up with our panel. And again, this is time for Q&A. As those questions are coming in, panelists, if you'd like to offer any final words, and then also tell us how you attendees or those listening can connect with you outside of this panel discussion. Dr. Adrian, we'll start with you.
Well, I just want to say again, thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity. Shanti is my little sister, so anytime she has an ask, I'm there. And so appreciate the work that she continues to do in this community. Every Tuesday from 7 to 9 p.m., they can find me on Relationship Talk with Dr. Adrian. You can download the Odyssey app, and we are WAOK. And so I will be jetting out of here because the first part of my show tonight was recorded, but my guests are waiting on me. And so Relationship Talk with Dr. Adrian. Also on Facebook, Couch Conversations with Dr. Adrian. They can join that Facebook group. And, you know, I'm not real good at the whole Instagram thing, but I am at Dr. Adrian, and doctor is spelled out for that. Or on Twitter, I am real_Dr. Adrian, and that's ADRIENNE. And so that's how they can find me. And I am very, very busy. So no, I am not taking people for my practice right now. I am not. I got a lot going on. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And Rebecca?
Repeating you, Dr. Adrian, this was so fun. Just a great opportunity to sit with some amazing people and talk. On Twitter, my Twitter is at Miss Hurley 2 Ys. But I'm also going to plug, my best friend and I have a podcast called The Hallway Hideout. We're both educators, and it's our secret little comfy corner to talk all things education, identity, being teachers, being in our 20s, all that jazz. So you can find our podcast on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. Again, it's called The Hallway Hideout, and the same goes for our Twitter and our Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Harris.
You can find, I am probably on every social media that you can think of, but you can find me on Facebook by my name, Daerzio Harris. You can find me on Instagram at the elder, DERDJH. That's the same for my Twitter handle as well. And I am Facebook, Instagram. I am also on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. So the same with my name. And it has definitely been, as my uncle can say, a plum pleasing pleasure to be here, iron sharpens iron, to be amongst people who have the expertise. Dr. Adrian, I really appreciate the insight that you have brought. You, as I stated, as a future educational leader, some things that you said that hopefully I will have that space to be able to say to my teachers when I see that they're burned out, that, you know, it's time, maybe a time for a personal day. Go home. Don't be afraid to do that. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you so much. And again, send any final comments, questions in the chat box. I'll go ahead and wrap us up for the evening. My name is Catie Williams. Again, this was a Silence the Shame community conversation. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists. Be sure that you are following Silence the Shame on social media for all of our upcoming events, specifically the Suicide Awareness Summit that is happening on September 14th. It is hybrid, but we would love to see you in person at the gathering spot in Atlanta. It's from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and it is free. So sign up and register. The link can be found in our social media handles as well. And last but not least, we are going to be having a brief survey that will pop up once you conclude this seminar or webinar. Just tell us what you thought about this conversation tonight so that we can continue to have meaningful discussions such as this around different topics pertaining to mental health. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you for the comments in the chat box, and just continue to do things to take care of yourself this week. Have a good night. Thank you all so much.
Good night, y'all. I gotta run. You can listen to me on the Odyssey app. Download the Odyssey app and listen to me. We get ready to have a really good conversation.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Dr. Adrienne.
Okay, good night.